Hi, welcome to my kitchen. My name is Sue, and today we're going to make something kind of strange, a little wacky. It's Karotopita. It's sweet carrot pie. Yep, I said carrots. It's very much like baklava when it's all done, but the filling, instead of all nuts, has ground carrots and nuts, and a few raisins too. It's kind of the Greek answer to carrot cake. It's really tasty, it's delicious, it's a sumptuous dessert, and I think you'd enjoy making it because it's kind of fun. It's got that strange ingredient, carrots. Just a reminder, today's recipe and all the recipes that we have used on this show can be found on our website, Tweeton.com. Please look us up. Not only will you find our recipes, but you'll find a way to order tapes of these cooking lessons, a way to email me. And I really do love to hear from people out there who have been watching. I love to communicate with you. And you'll find links to other Greek sites where you'll find information about the Greek culture and, of course, lots more recipes. And if you have a family recipe, something special, time-honored, traditional, that's just unique, and you'd like to share it with me, boy, I'd love for you to let me know about it. I'd love to read it. I'd love to think about it and imagine cooking it, and maybe I'd even want to use it on the show. So please communicate with me. Remember our website, Tweeton.com. Karotopita, sweet carrot pie, is very similar to baklava. It's a pita, and it's made with phyllo dough. So of course, in order to make it, you need a pound of phyllo dough. And you could make it yourself, or you can get it frozen in your grocer's frozen food section. You need butter to brush between all the leaves of the phyllo. And because this is a sweet dessert, you need sweet, unsalted butter. For flavoring, you need a little bit of cloves and you need some cinnamon. You also need some raisins, and these should be golden raisins. To help thicken it, keep it together and bind it, you need some cream of wheat, farina cereal. And this is something that's very traditional, used in a lot of Greek dishes. Now for the filling itself, walnuts. You need walnuts, and they'll be ground finely. And of course, if it's going to be a carrot pie, you need carrots, probably about one bunch. The whole thing is going to be soaked, bathed in a light honey syrup. So of course you need some sugar, and you definitely need some honey. Put all these ingredients together and you'll have a very, very interesting dessert. The first thing I want to give my attention to is the filling. And the first thing in the filling is to do the grinding of the carrots and the walnuts. Now I got a bunch of fresh carrots with the greens attached. And I did that because I wanted to make sure these were fairly fresh, tasty carrots. Of course, believe it or not, I'm not going to be using the greens today. So I want to cut off the greens and cut off the little stems right here, and wash the carrots and get them ready for grinding in my food processor. So off go the green part. And off goes the little stem end. What I want to end up with is about 3 cups of finely ground carrots. I'm not going to peel these. I don't think it's going to make much of a difference. Carrot peel doesn't have a funny flavor or a funny texture, and this whole thing's going to get ground up. So that's one step I will save myself. What I want to do is wash these, get all the dirt and grime off of them before I grind them. Before I put the carrots in the food processor, I do want to kind of chunk them up. So I'm just making rough chunks just to fit inside the food processor. And the reason we're grinding them rather than grating them is because you would have to have a very, very fine grater attachment. Remember, these things are going to be baking in the oven for about an hour, so they need to be quite thin, quite small, so that they'll cook through. And grinding kind of makes that easier to happen. Okay, so I've got a few carrot chunks, and it's just a matter of grinding them. Hold your ears. Alright, that looks pretty good. Now what I want to do is just measure this out. I want 3 cups of ground carrots. Now this can be a little more, it can be a little less. The reason I'm measuring doesn't have to be exact, but I want to get it approximate. I don't want to overdo it, have way too many carrots. But at the same time, what's the use of having carrot pie if you don't have enough? Okay, that's 1 cup. Back to chunking and back to grinding. In the days before food processors, people used to use those hand grinders that they would attach to the end of the table. Or do a lot of heavy-duty chopping. Boy, I like the food processors. Okay, 2 cups. And I think this is going to be just perfect. 1 more lone carrot. And you know what? I'm not even going to bother measuring. What am I going to do with a few tablespoons of leftover ground carrots? The whole thing's going in. And my carrots are done. Alright, now it's time for nuts. I need 2 cups of nuts. And again, this doesn't have to be exact. A little more, a little less isn't going to make that much of a difference. I'm just going to take my walnut halves, measure them into this cup measure, and dump them in the food processor. They too need to be finely ground. And this is what you're looking for, just about this texture, finely ground. And I'm not going to bother measuring. This is going to be close enough. It's not like a cake where you really have to worry about something rising or falling, or the proportions have to be perfectly exact. That's it, and in this goes. Alright, now I've got nuts, I've got carrots, I need to add the other things for the filling. To this mixture of the nuts and the carrots, I need to add some things to make the filling a little more exciting. The first thing I want to add is a 1/2 cup of vegetable oil, very light vegetable oil. If you had very light olive oil at home, you could use that. Now for texture, for sweetening and flavor, and just because Greeks love to use raisins, a 1/2 cup of golden raisins. But just be sure you pack them down and you get at least a 1/2 cup. Alright, that's fine. And I'm just going to throw in a little teeny bit more for fun. Alright, there's the raisins, the oil. And Greek people love to use farina. They use it a lot for thickening things. And we're going to use a 1/2 cup of farina or cream of wheat cereal. 1/2 cup. Okay, in that goes. And to all this we need some flavorings. First, a fourth of a teaspoon of ground cloves. And of course, cinnamon. Can you make a Greek dessert without cinnamon? You need a full teaspoon of cinnamon. This mixture is the filling to something that's going to be soaked in honey syrup. So it really doesn't need a lot of sweetening, but it does need a little. So you need to add 4 tablespoons of regular white granulated sugar. And then all you need to do is just mix everything up. Now this is my grandmother's recipe. I don't know if she used it in Greece and then continued to use it when she came over here to the United States, or if this is something that she kind of created when she lived on the farm for so many years. But it sounds like it's very typically Greek, using a lot of vegetables to make something delicious and sweet. And that looks just about right to me. It's time to give our attention to the phyllo. And of course, the first thing I've got to do is melt some butter. I have a whole pound of unsweetened butter here. I may end up using it all, I may not. What I'm going to do is I'm going to melt just 2 cubes to start with. And if as I'm brushing the pita I find that I need more, I'll melt a little more. It needs to be sweet, unsalted butter because this is a dessert. And it needs to be butter, no margarine, no oil. Hey, it's a dessert. Take some time to make. You're not going to do this every day. This isn't a coming home from school snack. It's something very special. So, melting these 2 cubes of butter. One thing about working with phyllo dough, you've got to get everything ready before you actually open the package. It's very, very thin, and so it dries out so quickly it can become brittle and too difficult to handle. So you've got to get everything ready in advance. That's why I wanted my butter melted, and now I'm going to give my attention to the actual phyllo itself. Frozen phyllo dough must be thawed before you use it. I would recommend putting it in the refrigerator the night before, leaving it overnight, and letting it thaw in the refrigerator. You could also stick it out on the countertop, but it'll take a few hours. The main thing is the dough must be brought to room temperature. It cannot be chilled. Remove it from this plastic bag and unfold it. Got kind of a wax paper covering, and you want to just take it and completely unfold it. For this particular pita, I'm using a 13 by 9 inch baking pan. And because of the size, what I can do is just take these full sheets of phyllo and cut them in half. You can see that if I cut the phyllo in half, it'll fit just perfectly inside this pan. And I like that because I don't have to fool around with anything. So I'm going to just cut this in half. As best I can. I'm just going to use 1/2 at a time. So this half that I'm not using, I'm going to cover with plastic wrap so that it doesn't dry out. And for a little extra protection, I'm going to put a damp tea towel just over this portion that I'm not using right away. I may get to it, I may not, but whatever happens, I definitely do not want it to dry out. So this is okay. And when you're working with phyllo dough, it's good to have a nice little sharp knife around, just in case you have to kind of cut one of the phyllo leaves free from the bunch. All right, first thing, when doing anything that requires phyllo dough, you've got to get your pan well buttered. So I'm slopping on the butter everywhere. Now I want to just place, about 10 to 12 sheets of dough on my pan. And after I put a piece, I want to make sure that I butter it. This is what keeps the phyllo dough light and separate. If you don't do this, well, there's no use in using phyllo dough. You might as well use something else. I did have a relative once who married into our Greek family, and she wanted to make baklava. And she had the recipe. She just didn't like the idea of using butter between all the layers of phyllo. So she thought she would save money and save fat by not brushing the leaves of phyllo with butter. Well, when it came time to eat the finished product, it was just one big globby mess. There's no way to cut corners here. You have got to separate the phyllo leaves with butter, or in the case of something like spanakopita, with oil. All right, this is number 12. And I'm just going to put it in. And I don't have to butter this one because I'm going to plop all the filling on. Okay, it's a really hard step. Put all the filling in the middle. Smells pretty good too, with the cinnamon and the cloves. And carrots are a naturally sweet vegetable. Want to make sure that you spread out the filling and distribute it evenly. You don't want any big mounds anywhere. This is not a moist filling, so you don't really have to worry about whether the filling actually touches the pan or is completely enveloped by the phyllo. We're really not trying to keep anything in, but just spread it evenly. This is going to make a nice thick filling. If you wanted a thinner layer of the filling, you could use a larger pan, and then you'd be using more phyllo on the bottom, and you'd have to cut the phyllo to size. Okay, this is about as flat and even as I'm going to get it. Now, put the top on. Another 10 to 12 layers of phyllo for the top. And of course, butter between each layer. Almost done. I've got 2 more to go. This is really easy. Using a 13 by 9 pan, cutting that pound of phyllo in half makes for a very, very easy process. And this is my last piece of phyllo. And this was a good batch. I didn't have to fight with this batch at all. Now this last piece, I want to make sure this whole thing is just drenched in butter, because I need to trim the phyllo, the excess phyllo. So I want to make sure that not only the top is brushed very well, but so are the sides and that excess, because that'll make the trimming so much easier. Alright, now I've got to get my little sharp knife and start trimming. And when I'm talking about trimming, what I mean is getting rid of this excess, especially here in the corners. So because everything's so nice and greased up for me, I just need to take my knife and just run it along and trim this excess phyllo off. And because it's so nicely greased up, it just peels right off for the most part. Okay, that's this side. Now I want to work on the corner. It's the same idea. Just hold it and cut it. And then it should just peel right off. This just makes the whole thing look a lot nicer. And just keep doing this on all four sides until you're completely done. Okay, that's pretty good. Only thing I want to do right now is just one more once over with butter around the edges in particular. And I'm ready to cut this into shapes. I need to cut this before I bake it. It's just like baklava. It needs to be cut all the way through. You can use whatever shape you want. Squares, rectangles, triangles, diagonal. I'm going to make about 2-inch cuts this direction and 3-inch cuts this direction, but you could do whatever you want. And you want to cut as best you can all the way through. This is another place where having the butter generously applied to the edges is helpful because it makes the cutting a lot easier. You're not dealing with any brittle phyllo dough. Very malleable. And don't worry if you don't really cut all the way through. You should try, but if it doesn't happen, you can always recut after the whole thing is done just before serving. The purpose of the cutting is to allow, when it's all done baking, allow the syrup to just get in there and make this really good. Okay, I'm ready to bake this. I need to bake this in a 350-degree oven for at least 45 minutes to 60 minutes. I'll check it at 45 and maybe leave it until 60. It needs to be a nice golden brown. While the pita is baking, I'm going to make the syrup. Now this is a lighter honey syrup than the one used for baklava. It calls for 2 cups of water, 1 cup of granulated sugar. In goes the sugar. And just a half cup of honey. I've saved my measuring cup from the oil. I'm going to pour the honey in here, and the honey should just kind of plop right out without sticking. Yep. Now what I want to do is bring this to a boil over fairly high heat. And I want to stir it because I want the sugar to be completely dissolved. That's really my goal. I'm not going to boil it to any kind of particular stage or temperature. I just want to make sure that the sugar is dissolved. Alright, all my sugar is dissolved and the syrup is just coming up to a boil. Alright, it's been boiling for about a minute. I'm just going to take it off the heat and wait for the pita to finish baking. It's been about 50 minutes. I checked the pita, it's nice and brown, so I'm going to take it out. The hot pita needs to cool at least a half hour before I pour the syrup over it. My pita is cooled, my syrup is still warm, but it's just not boiling hot. And it's time for me to just pour the syrup over the pita. Now comes the hardest part. You've got to leave it alone. It needs to soak at least 2 hours. And it would be better if it soaked longer, even up to overnight. So I'm going to leave it alone for at least 2 hours, maybe longer if I can resist. It's been a few hours and the syrup is all soaked up. Remember, it was swimming, now it's all soaked up. Before I serve this, I want to just go back and go over all the cuts I made. And there it is. Karotopita. Got delicious flaky pastry on top, on the bottom, and a delicious carrot, nut, raisin filling. You could serve it with a dollop of whipped cream if you want. I'm going to have some right now.